A shadow brand approach allows companies to actually go out and test, get the data that you need before you actually do any significant investment. When you actually test a concept out under a third party or a shadow brand, your parent brand does not impact how that customer is going to react. So you truly get great market evidence, right? You really understand if there is really demand there. Are you really solving that problem? So you don't get the benefit of the brand, which is a good thing when you're trying to do something new and different.
Nancy, thank you for being here. Welcome. Very excited to speak with you today. You've had a long career working at a variety of different companies in different verticals, building ventures, I would say, the title of the podcast, beyond the core and outside of the core of what those companies do. So really want to dig in with you today on that. And, currently you work at Caterpillar and you are working, I'm sure, on a whole variety of different things. But one of the things that caught our attention was this new venture beyond the core called EcoForge. And so, I'd love to start there and understand, how did Caterpillar and how did you and Caterpillar sort of get together and say, we've got to go build new businesses or new ventures beyond the core. And then we can speak sort of about how you got to EcoForge specifically and what it is.
Got it. Okay. Thanks, Ben. And nice to meet you as well, Marcus. So I was brought into Caterpillar to basically stand up kind of innovation and incubation within an emerging group within Caterpillar in, I'll say, energy transition. It's really electrification and energy solutions. So if you think about how the world is trying to get more sustainable in a lot of different industries, same thing is happening in construction. And so there was a lot of interest around electrification, alternative fuels and whatnot. But to build those things, takes a lot of time, takes a lot of money. And so I was brought in to kind of find a way to actually bring rapid product market fit and get that demand first before we actually invest in anything. So we actually me and my team started out kind of talking to customers to understand some of their problems. And what we found was some of the problems did relate to electrification and some of the problems didn't necessarily relate to electrifications. And as we kind of discovered this, we got some really great qualitative research, but qualitative research doesn't really bode well when I'm talking to my finance person or I'm talking to my legal person or I'm talking to other folks, the really business-minded individuals, if you will. And so I knew I needed to get hard data, very, statistically significant, whatnot. And so I found this company, Spark9, and said, hey, I've got this concept that I kind of validated with customers in the market, but now I actually have to go and get demand. And that actually sprung the beginning of EcoForge. We needed a brand that would encompass like sustainability and sustainable construction, but not be connected to CAT. So we are separate and apart. We're not another entity of CAT. We're sort of a way for CAT to actually test new concepts without it coming back to CAT to understand whether or not there really is market demand. And if you've been to the website, you can see some of the products or solutions that we've tested. Some of them have been like awesome and they're off the charts from demand. And some of them, unfortunately, were, I'll call them duds. But it's really kind of our testing platform. And so it's been a great experience here, and I've actually gotten some other entities within CAT to adopt this approach, right? For large manufacturing companies and industrial companies that want to test things beyond the core, it's very difficult for them without impacting their brand, right? They don't want to damage their brand. They don't want to, necessarily give customers an idea that this might be coming to market. It might be a great idea, but there may not be enough market demand to warrant manufacturing or putting in a new production line. And so this kind of a shadow brand approach allows companies to actually go out and test, get the data that you need before you actually do any significant investment.
And so did you have enough support to put together that shadow brand or have that sort of interface from an executive level perspective? You said you had some qualitative and quantitative kind of backing, but was that an easy process to get that stood up?
It was a longer process than I thought. I come from a lot of industries that run really fast. I mean, retail, like with Best Buy. And so at Best Buy, it was never an issue. In other companies like Cat, that are, have a really strong brand, not that Best Buy doesn't have a strong brand, it was a lot of kind of stakeholdering. It was a lot of educating executives on why we would do this. I would say that I spent the majority of my time talking with my attorney to get him comfortable with this approach, right? Once we did, then I got my SVP comfortable with this approach. And he's been a super big advocate for doing this. And then we're able to go in and, kind of make the pitch for the funds that we need to build any of those solutions. But it's really about educating, senior leaders on why you want to use this approach, what's the benefit for it, not only from a benefit from a time perspective, right? Because I can do this fairly quickly, put something up, test it to see if the market actually has interest in it. But I also can do it in a way that does not either positively or negatively impacts the brand. The other thing that I think is important about this approach is that when you actually test a concept out under a third party or a shadow brand, right? Your parent brand does not impact how that customer is going to react. So you truly get great market evidence, right? You really understand if there is really demand there. Are you really solving that problem? So you don't get the benefit of the brand, which is a good thing when you're trying to do something new and different. It was a little bit of a slog, but we were able to find a way to actually convince them. But a lot of talks with our attorneys.
I'm just curious, just when you say it was a little bit of a slog, from a time constraint perspective, how long did it take? Was it months or was it just a matter of maybe a few weeks?
What's your definition of a little bit of a slog, Nancy?
I'll say my definition kind of changed here at Caterpillar. It was a couple of months, right? So I originally tried to do this concept internally here using internal resources, and large organizations have a lot of digital things that they want to do. So I couldn't find a way to actually do it in within Caterpillar, like using Caterpillar resources. And so I needed to go outside. And so it was probably about maybe 3 or 4 months of just kind of, talking to potential partners and then talking internally, getting my boss comfortable, getting the attorney comfortable again, because you'd always come back with new questions and be like, yeah, that's not going to be a problem. Having him interface with a partner that we ultimately selected so that he got comfortable. And then when we did get enough of that data, that market data, that statistically significant market data, went to a governance board and said, okay, so here's the qualitative research that we have. Here's the quantitative research that we have. And now that's why I'm asking for this amount of money to actually go build prototypes.
Yeah, well, a lot of credit to you, Nancy. I know you've seen this movie before in different organizations, and I think you've been able to piece all that together to get some pretty good momentum. Ben and I, we work with a lot of organizations globally, and often it's taking 6, 12 plus months to really get that sort of momentum. So congrats.
We have a saying here in North America, we always find a way to do stuff, right? Lots of organizations have a lot of, processes that can be super complicated. We always find a way to get things done because we know that it's, a lot of things are very dynamic in this space. And so I've got to go out and kind of test that in as rapid as a way as I can. But still being, as I always say, we're always, legal and compliant. We're always legal and compliant. So nobody can come back and kind of point the finger at us. I'm like, nope, my attorney signed off on it, right? And actually, my colleagues in Europe are doing this approach as well. And as I mentioned before, there are other groups in Caterpillar kind of looking at this approach to kind of go out and test concepts.
As you think about the next step for some of the concepts, let's say at EcoForge or elsewhere that are working, do you envision those being spun back into Caterpillar how do you do a handoff there? Or are you thinking, oh, maybe we should spin these out as new companies and new entities and sort of go even further away from Caterpillar? How are you thinking about that next phase of, whether we call it scale or not, but the next phase in the development of those ventures?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ben. When I was at Cargill leading their digital business incubator, that was a question that we had. What do we move it back into the business? Do we spin it out? One thing actually did get spin out. Most of the other things kind of got encompassed back in one of the lines of business. Here at CAT, we're still trying to prove out some of the concepts, right? So obviously we proved them online. We've got that market demand, but now I've actually got to go and build some of these things and actually see in the real world, do they really solve that problem? Are customers still excited about it once they actually see it and they can live with it? Or is it just something like, well, they were interested in it and they clicked a button and they submitted a form? So we haven't gotten to that point. But I can say that, if there is great market demand and if there is, a steady new revenue stream, I and my colleague will do our best to make sure that that gets as much advocacy internally here at CAT as possible, because again, we're looking at innovation and incubation, right? And sometimes innovation is something that's adjacent or might be transformative for the short term, right? These aren't necessarily long terms kind of play. They might just be for 5, 10, or 15 years. But who doesn't want a new business that has 5, 10, or 15 years revenue stream to augment or supplement what you already have going? So we haven't crossed that bridge yet. We're still kind of, building some of these prototypes, getting them out in the real world, and trying to bring, I'll say, minimal revenue into CAT to understand, is this really a possibility?
Yeah, and I think it's a really great insight there, just in how you articulated that and how you pitched it. It really seems like you pitched going on the offense, right? It wasn't a defensive kind of posture. It's how do we create these businesses for a period of time and generate new revenue? And I think often Ben and I have seen in the market, sometimes some of these measures are really defensive. So I think it's great that you've been able to take that approach.
Yeah, I think you have to, right? And I think, with a company that has, I've worked for some very large companies, Cargill and Caterpillar, whatnot, that have been around for 100 years. And so they're used to doing things in a very long kind of game. But, if you have more of an corporate entrepreneurial aspect, that it might be a short term gain, while there is a niche opportunity. We have a saying also here in North America, there's riches in niches, right? And so if you can find a nice little niche and really, I'll say, take advantage of it. I was actually going to use the word exploit, but if you can take advantage of it, you're going to bring in new revenue. It doesn't mean that product is going to be in your product portfolio for the next 100 years. It might be, hey, you know what, we're going to start this, we know that competition is going to come in, and then we'll find an exit plan.
Right. So that's an interesting point, because sometimes we're talking to big companies and, they're thinking along the lines of incremental innovation and then, crazy disruption. Like that's where R&D sits, they're building flying robots or whatever they're trying to do, and very far from commercialization. It sounds like you position this somewhere in the middle where you say, look, there are opportunities we can sort of see around the corner. We see those opportunities. We think they're shorter term wins for us. So we don't have to go pitch a 20-year, 100-year vision. We have to pitch a 5-year P&L, maybe incremental revenue, but in new areas and fast. So you want to see that kind of revenue growth pretty quickly. Is that fair? That kind of that middle spot of it, not so close to the core, but not crazy R&D.
Right. That adjacency space, right? There's a lot of opportunity in that adjacency space. And if you think about any industry that's going through transformation, there's always, right, a lot of people focus on the core and make their products, just incrementally better. And then, and I've played on the core, and I've also played on a way outer edge, right? I mean, like way outer edge. And you do have some customers or some interested parties out there that want that way outer edge. But there's always this like great space in between that adjacency space where sometimes it gets lost. And sometimes when you talk with customers, they will give you like clues to that adjacency space that no one is like really addressing. And I think that's where the innovation, that's where the opportunity actually lies. And we've been fortunate enough in some of the work that we've done here in North America to find a couple of those.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that is where the opportunity is. It's a couple of years out, but not 10, 20 years out. It's, maybe not 6 months from now, but it's just around the corner. And so when you were making the case for doing this, did you try to put dollar values on? I mean, these ventures were ideas, but did you say, look, for this to be material for a company the size of cat, we have to hit, X millions of dollars in Y years. Did you try to put financial targets, even though it was super, super early?
You know, a lot of companies I work for doing this kind of work, they do put a financial target out there, and sometimes those financial targets are just not reachable. Not by any startup, not by a unicorn, not by anybody in corporate. So what we did instead is we would do price tests. We would understand like, okay, I've got great market demand. Now I'm going to go out and I'm going to understand like, what am I going to actually? How can I charge? Like, what's going to be my ceiling? What's going to be my floor? And then from there, we're able to extrapolate what potentially this could be over the course of 5 years, 10 years, whatever it might be, to see how, what the revenue stream might be. But we never went out and said, this thing here is going to be worth X millions of dollars over the next 5 years. We wanted to be very strategic about how we approached it and very data driven as well. So great market data, great pricing data, and then I can start to do the math. Right. And then I go out and if I'm building a prototype, I'll understand some of the costs. Right. But if I come out and say it's going to be a $20 billion business or it's going to be a $5 million business, I may not understand the cost. I may not understand what I'm going to be able to charge for it. So we took a little bit of a different approach, maybe a little bit more methodical in nature.
Yeah, it sounds also like a bottom up approach is the way I describe that, which is let's not set like a TAM, like a total addressable market on something silly and make numbers up, but let's actually go and sort of methodically work from the bottom and say, okay, well, if we can sell it for $100 and there's 1,000 customers that we think we can reach, we have a number that is, and now we can decide if that number is interesting or not. We haven't achieved it, but we can at least do that bottoms up analysis. I always encourage all, startups to do it that way, ventures to do it that way, even though most, to your point, have to pitch this like $1 billion market that we're going to hit in X number, $100 million in 5 years. I'm like, nobody ever, well, some people do get there, but very few do.
Yeah, TAM, clam, and some, if I could say, I mean, that was a methodology we used at Cargill, right? And we did have like an astronomical ask for anybody who came into that program, which I don't think anybody ever accomplished it. Here, what we're trying to do is, people will ask us that and we say, well, based on the data that we have, here's what we think it potentially could be. But again, it's what we think it could be. It's not proven out. And so then we have to go and prove it out. We're about, let's have a hypothesis, go out and prove it somehow, get some data, and then kind of refine it.
Yeah, and what we've seen also when you're the work you do in just putting the financial modeling and testing the assumptions, the financial assumptions in that 0 to 1 phase is so important because you're getting more data. As exactly what you described with all kind of the price checking. I'm curious in the pitch strategically. You talked a bit about before about the niches and you said exploiting. I like to use the word harvest. Was there ever part of the pitch of maybe if we can dominate this new category, this new very specific niche that becomes very strategically valuable vis-a-vis our competitors? Was that even part of so how you were able to get so much support so quickly?
It was for one of the ideas that that we concept out, and it has to do with sustainability, right? And if you think about, the construction industry in particular is a very old business. And it's a very methodical business. I mean, when I visited job sites, the superintendents or the project managers still work on Excel or sometimes even paper, right? And so technology is not necessarily in their forte.
No, but I think it's important just to note the fact that how you're being able to be successful in pitching, you've taken different angles, right? You took the quantitative angle, you took a strategic angle. There's many ways on how you can accelerate. Is there anything in hindsight, thinking about Kat and other things you would have done differently in pitching new ventures to boards?
Yeah, I think one of the things I found in doing this work in a lot of different industries is where this kind of team generally sits, right? And for me, I've done it at UnitedHealthcare, I've done it at Best Buy, and I've done it, at Cargill, and I've done it here at CAT. And what I find is that most organizations don't elevate this work enough. And by that, I mean, it really needs to sit at that chief strategy officer because you need to span the entire, enterprise. It's not just within a business unit. It's not within just one department. It really should be within the chief strategy officer or chief sustainability or whatnot. It really needs to sit that high up. But every every group that I've been in has been very business kind of focused. At Cargill was actually interesting. It was actually led by the IT department because we were focused on digital, right? Digital kind of farming, digital kind of products, digital types of services. And so there was a heavy focus on digital. But we did get a lot of senior executives, both from the business units as well as the C-suite, participate in, let's say, the review of these opportunities and allocating funds to the internal founders to actually go and kind of do the work. So I think that was probably the best case. But I would, my recommendation and my advice is like, the higher you can put this in the organization, I think the better you're going to get, because you're not necessarily tied to, what the strategy is of that department or that line of business. You're really trying to look at the organization overall or the enterprise overall and trying to find new lines of business in that kind of maybe adjacent space, maybe even into the core a little bit, but with a tweak. And maybe you're, moving a little bit into the transformation space. But if you do it in a business unit, you're a little bit constrained.
Yeah, that's exactly what we've seen, which is when you're focused on innovation in a business unit, you're almost always going to get pulled closer and closer to the business unit. And that just makes logical sense. They've got a roadmap that's as long as anybody's, things and goals and targets that they have to hit. And you're off running around doing fun, crazy stuff. And they're like, no, can I use those resources to do the stuff I need to accomplish? But then the flip side is also sort of true, which is if you're too far away, then when you've got this thing and you're like, this works, we validated it, and we need a home for it, I guess you could create a line of business. And maybe that's some of what you're looking at CAT, which is we're going to spin up a new line of business with its own or you're trying to find a home for it. And if you're too far away and you bring them something, they're like, what do you want me to do with this? So I found, too close and you get incremental, too far, and they don't care.
Right. Too far, they don't care. Right. And I think that was the challenge that we had at Cargill. Some of the things were, very, I'd say, revolutionary for farmers, but might have been too far away from the line of business. And then some of the other ones were kind of maybe a little bit too core. Still technology enabled, but maybe a little bit too core. And then there was a lot of discussion around like, where is this going to sit? And I think that's a question, as you mentioned, Ben, no matter what you do, right? And so I haven't really found a good model, and maybe you and Marcus have found a good model where it is kind of in that middle, right? You're not like embedded in the business unit, but then you're not in the ivory tower. You're kind of in that middle, again, sort of in that adjacency, right, area, that middle zone, so that you have that constant connection to, the chief strategy officer as well as the business, and you kind of all three are working together as you're exploring different customer problems and solutions.
Yeah, what we've seen is, you need to get that initial momentum, and clearly you've been able to do that in different organizations. But then it really is about, can you articulate and sell more of a portfolio approach of different ventures that you're going to develop, regardless if they're going to be spun in afterwards, where they sit on the different kind of horizons. But certainly it's been, fantastic to hear some of these insights you provided.
Yeah, I'm just going to pick up on that portfolio approach because when I came here, there wasn't this notion of portfolio, and that's how I operated, at Cargill and other places as well. We always had portfolios, whether it was like at Best Buy, I was leading the health portfolio, and I was involved in the EV portfolio. And so when I got here, I saw that I needed to put some context and some, let's say, portfolio around some of the things that we were exploring. So it was a customer problem, but we might try 3 or 4 different ways to actually solve that problem. And that's where, you try to get that flywheel effect and go, okay, I'm going to see which one actually has enough sticking point so that you can invest in it, as opposed to doing something that is more, I'll say, project based, right? So think of it as a portfolio. What is that customer problem, and what kind of solutions can you offer that might solve that overarching customer problem, and then go out and test them and see which one actually has the best chance of actually, making it to a new product or a new service or a new line of business.
And you use the word dud, so I'll use
Dud.
dud, which I thought was a great word, by the way. I'm going to steal that when I'm trying to explain to people. Some of them are going to be duds. How have you found CAT or other organizations you've worked with comfortable with that notion of, okay, I get the idea. We're going to try a bunch of things. Fine. I get the idea. We're going to do it outside of the core and not involve necessarily a ton of core resources. Fine. I totally get that. I get it's going to be fast, but what's the appetite, the stomach, the understanding, the realization when you come back and say, we tried, 10 things and X number of them, whatever X might be, aren't going to work, so we're shutting them down. What's the reaction you've seen to that?
Yeah, I would say that depends on the organization itself. So in some of the organizations I've been in, and I'll point to Best Buy and I'll point to Cargill, they had a great culture of innovation, right? Obviously, Cargill, lots of innovation on the food space. I mean, they have an awesome like R&D facility to do all kinds of things food related. And Best Buy just being retail, the nature of retail, fast, right? You're always trying to change things. So it largely depends on that corporate innovation culture. Those cultures that see this as more of a learning experience and see these types of experiments, these types of tests as sort of the easiest way to go out and kind of identify the duds and kind of put them on the side. And the dud doesn't mean it's never going to happen, right? It's just not now, right? There's just not, it's not now. And I've got a lot of those duds in my portfolio that I could talk about.
We all do. We all do.
Yeah, which is
That's
great
natural.
because, and if you don't have enough duds, there's something wrong with you,
Totally
right?
agree.
Yeah, because you learn so many lessons from those duds. And then in those organizations that really don't have a real strong innovation culture, and I mean innovation, not engineering, not scientific R&D, but I mean innovation. They don't understand the failures and why you say, well, I know you really thought this was going to happen. I've had these conversations here. I know you really thought this was going to happen, but I'm telling you, the market doesn't see that as a problem now. And there's reasons for that. And then you go into the reasons for it. And then you say, I'm not saying this is never going to happen. I'm saying right now, given the market conditions, given where we are, it's not going to happen. So don't invest anymore and put it on the side and then kind of take a pulse every 6 months, every 8 months, maybe once a year, depending on market conditions to see if it's going to change. And then if it is, go back out, test that concept, tweak the concept, test it again and see if there's any traction. It's not like dud, it's dead, put a tombstone on it, right? It's like not now. And so that's a concept that I've tried to incorporate here and I've gotten people to start talking about that language. It's not now. It doesn't mean never. It's not now.
We've had that conversation so many times with people. Honestly, it's so funny where, Marcus and I, coming from a background as founders and investors, we just call failures, and we're okay with that, and I don't love failing, but we get that that's part of the job. But, we've worked with so many companies where we use that kind of word and they're like, it's going to be hard to sell that in, we're going to go do a bunch of things and fail more than we succeed. I'm like, yeah, fair. So, the backlog, the, not now is exactly the terminology we use. I still find it, some organizations don't, and maybe it's the culture, they don't really get the learning part, like I'm buying, let's say, learning. And it's like, well, do I want to buy learning or do I want to buy revenue or do I want to buy profit? And so I'm curious also, just like, how do you sell in the note as you're doing this at CAT now? And sort of, you mentioned other groups are like, oh, the interesting process, so we don't call it a failure. We say not now, maybe later, makes total sense. Learning, like, how do you sell learning into an org?
That's a great question, and I'll say that I didn't have to sell learning at CAT, and I didn't have to sell it at Best Buy, and I didn't have to sell it at UnitedHealthcare or even at Cargill. I think it was part of those companies' cultures. Here, there is a learning culture, and the learning culture is, they've had this approach in previous years, like I don't know, maybe like 10 years ago, and then through whatever, they decided to kind of scrap it and do something more traditional. So they always want to learn, right? But I think what I brought in and what I tried to sell when it came to learning, Ben, was I just don't want to learn, right? It's like, when you're in undergrad school and you're like, oh, I got to take an elective. you can take art history class, right? But at the end of the day, art history class isn't going to get you into a great MBA school, or maybe it does now. I don't know. So I'm
Imagine
like,
if we had art history degrees, though, Nancy. Imagine
yeah,
if we do not, but just imagine.
yeah, but so I try to use that analogy, and I'm like, I love art, and I did take art history, but I knew it was like an elective I had to take, just to fill something up. But at the end of the day, like, I really want to learn something that is going to help me determine whether or not this is a thing, right? And so, you mentioned it before, I think, then talking about assumptions and hypotheses, right? Like, what are you actually going to try to learn, right? Oh, I'm going to try to learn, like, is there really a customer willing to pay this amount per month? Okay, that's pretty, strategic. That's pretty detailed. But if you're just going to go out there and say, I'm just going to learn, right? And I say, well, what are you going to learn? I'm just going to learn. And I'm like, well, that's like going to art history class. It's not really going to have any meaning. It's not going to move the concept forward. It's not going to move it backward. You're basically going to be stuck in the mud. So you have to be, I've tried to help folks build, test plans, learning plans, experiment plans, whatever it is, and say, what are the 3 to 5 things you need to figure out right now? Like right now, as you put this thing in the market with those customers, those prototype customers, if you will, that will tell you whether or not you should continue the investment. And that's a hard concept here for CAT because they really don't understand that. They want to learn, right? And so there's a lot of learning going on. And I'm like, that's awesome. But at the end of the day, it's not helping me decide whether or not I should invest in something or not.
Well, it's rapid applied learning, I think is how you framed it, right? I'm curious a bit about the point you made earlier about how important the culture of innovation was to really set this kind of fertile grounds. What advice do you have for organizations to effectively have that set properly for corporate venture development? Because it is a bit different, right? There's a lot of organizations, I would say, have really strong innovation cultures. But then when it comes to venture building those activities that you've been successful with, it is a bit different. So do you have any advice from your experience?
Yeah, I think, like I've been fortunate in that I've worked in some companies that had, the real strong innovation, but innovation with always a commercial kind of perspective on it. And so that venture capital or venture building kind of was innate in them, right? You just don't go to innovate for innovate's sake, right? Those days I think are long past. I think it really has to start by getting senior leaders like on board and really understand what it really means. And in the companies, and I'll share something at Cargill, right? We had a number of different ways that you could innovate. We had a number of different groups that brought innovation in. We had a way that you could get different colored belts, much like Six Sigma, a white belt, a blue belt, or whatever color belt, in this type of way of doing it, all with the notion of doing something different than was before, whether it was an internal thing where I'm going to be more operationally effective and improve things with a concept of it being a bottom line, or externally that I'm going to actually build a new business, a new line for Cargill, right? So there's always that kind of commercial aspect to it. And I think that kind of goes with the learning, for the previous response, right? You can learn for learn's sake, right? And I think we all kind of do that. I mean, I'm like right now kind of dialing way in on AI, which who isn't, right? But I'm not doing anything with it. I still need to understand it. I got exposed to it when I was at UnitedHealthcare, did some work there, and then lots at Cargill, and a little bit here. But I'm not learning with, let's say, the notion that I'm going to use any one of those models to build an AI-based business at this point. But the cultures that I've been a part of that really look at venture building and do it well, they have that mix of that innovation, and it kind of permeates the entire organization, as well as that notion of commercialization, right? How do you take that thing that you found that has a new way to solve a customer problem and customers want to pay you for it? How do you then put that in a new product, a new service, a new line of business? And whether you launch it internally as a separate line, or you exit it as exit the opportunity and have those folks who worked on it as part of that startup and fund them for the first couple of years. A lot comes down to literally what is the core of that company? Do they really believe in innovation? for innovation's sake, or do they believe that it's really a way to solve customers' problems, and solving customer problems always has some commercial aspect to it? And that's where the venture building comes in.
Right. Right. Yeah. I think the totally agree with, and I've lived the experience of learning for learning's sake, which sometimes again is interesting. Like if you're dabbling in something like AI, that's totally fine, and you hope you can find some applicability to it. I think learning to make better commercial decisions, whether it's like, let's not do this thing because we can't figure it out right now, not never, but right now, or wait a second, we've got a couple of customers that are excited about this. We should double down and figure it out. Maybe you can walk us through a little bit more. It sounds like you run a pretty tight ship from a systematic experimentation kind of level. So a couple of things. Like one is there a playbook there where you sort of established with folks at CAT or elsewhere to say, look, we're going to do X interviews, we're going to do Y. If we don't hit, we're going to have scorecards for certain things to say, if we don't hit these thresholds, we're not going to move forward, or we will move forward. I'm not suggesting you articulate all of those things, but curious if you've built up that systematic way of doing it, or how qualitative winging it is it, and where's the balance between those two?
Yeah, it's a great question, Ben. At Cargill, we had a very systematic way about doing it. And we had a playbook. And it was a challenge to get internal folks to kind of abide, let's say, by the playbook. It's like, yeah, there's a reason we want you to go out and talk to customers and get this kind of evidence and da-da-da-da-da. And after a while, through coaching and through a coaching network that I set up, I got them kind of focused on it. But it needed to be light enough, right? Because you need to be very nimble, right? And here at Caterpillar, I thought, such a playbook approach probably wouldn't work. So what I did is I took the notion of, the traditional innovation curve, right, that we all know, right? And I said, okay. And then I went out and did some research, and I said, I'm just in North America, so let me understand, let's say, how many construction companies make a certain list, like the ENR, Engineering News Record, has a list of like the top 400 engineering or construction companies. Let me use that as sort of my N, the number, and then let me lay the innovation curve over that to figure out what my threshold should be as I'm kind of moving through the different phases. And then knowing that we have some challenges to reach customers, take that number and kind of slice it in half so that it is still a stretch, but still approachable. And so we did have a little bit of a methodology. It's not as, let's say, rigorous as I had at Cargill, but it really helped kind of my team anyway, kind of get the evidence that we needed to move to that next level so that I could go to that next level and then go and get additional funding to build prototypes. And it's a very kind of light methodology. Like our experiments aren't as I would say well-defined as I've used them in the past. Like even at Best Buy, we were so into like learning plans. I mean, we would spend, I wouldn't say hours, but we spent a lot of time really crafting those out. And what are we actually going to measure? How are we going to measure it? Here, it's a little bit looser. It's still a little bit disciplined, but not as, I'd say, rigorous as what I had at Cargill and what I had at Best Buy. It seems to fit the industry right now, but come a couple of years from now, might need to tighten it up a bit.
I've never found a one size fits all model, and I always tell folks that, like, you can't bring in a top down model, even what you've used before, and you've lived this experience where it's, we were very rigorous at Cargill, and I'm sure you come to CAT. You read the room and you're like, okay, I'm going to take some of these pieces, but I'm not taking the whole playbook and just slapping it on here. I've just never found that works. The sort of top down approach, cookie cutter approach has worked ever for venture building.
I'm just curious a bit about leveraging talent outside of the organization, taking more of an ecosystem approach. What are some of the best practices from your experiences that you would like to share of just what has worked, what hasn't worked in doing so?
Yeah. So here at CAT, finding really good partners just to help execute experiments was a big thing for me. And we found actually a great partner in a company called Spark Number 9. Super awesome to work with to help us validate things. And then the ecosystems that we've developed really around the startups, right? If you think about like even at Best Buy and Cargill, right? It was all about startups who can run faster than organizations. So they might have a great IoT device that can capture sound in, let's say, chickens and identify the early onset of avian flu, right? Bird flu. And it's like, great, if I try to build that internally, it's probably going to take me 3 or 4 years. Let's partner with that startup. So I did a lot of work with startups at Cargill on a lot of different, let's say, animal kind of platforms, whether it was chickens, fish, uh, cows, any kind of thing. And we even used external partners, startups on crops as well, because they had developed computer visioning models that we just couldn't develop fast enough, even though Cargill had a great data scientist group, absolutely awesome folks to work with. And we've kind of done the same thing here at Caterpillar. There's companies out there that are exploring, really interesting kinds of new energy platforms. Let's go partner with them. Whether they've been in the business for 10 years or they've been in the business for 3 years, they can move faster. And who doesn't want to work with a large enterprise, right? And startups, I always say, yeah, I know you guys want to work with Cargill or you want to work with Caterpillar, you want to work with Best Buy, but you have to understand that there's a lot of bureaucracy that comes with that. Okay. So it's not going to be as fast and easy as you think. So, just making sure that, you kind of are super upfront with them and they understand that it's going to take a little bit longer to get stuff done. Although here we always try to find a way to get things done fast. But our ecosystems are really more about startups and how we can kind of, bring new solutions to customers in the construction world that they've never seen before. So.
All right. Well, we're almost at time, Nancy. So maybe I'll just ask one last question. What advice would you give to corporate leaders who are looking at the venture building model? So what you're doing, I know you've done it before at CAT with EcoForge. What advice would you give them, as they're trying to figure this out before they've actually taken the leap to do so?
Yeah. One thing I would say, now is a great time to do it. So if you're not doing it now, get in right now because there's a lot of chaos going on. So there's a lot of opportunity. The second thing I would say would be find groups, find peers, talk to other people who've done this, who've been successful at doing it and not successful at doing it. I think that was the one thing that I don't think Caterpillar necessarily did. I don't think they really went out and talked to other organizations that did that before, right? To understand like what works and what doesn't work and what you should bring in and what you shouldn't bring in. And the third thing is know that this is an experiment for you as well. Right. So, don't think that you're going to have the ideal model. You're going to have to kind of tweak it and adapt it and whatnot and be conscious of that. And I would say the fourth thing is, you need to get all levels of the organization involved, right? The senior executives have to buy into this, right? They need to bring this up at every meeting. The senior leaders, right? The department leaders, the folks on the field, right? It has to be sort of top down, bottom up. Everybody has to be thinking about doing this because you never know where that next big solution is going to come to. And I would say the last thing is, agencies are great partners to work with, but you got to do the work yourself. You got to sit down with that customer. You've got to have that conversation because they'll tell you, that's kind of a problem for me, but what I really want is this. And when they start talking about when more customers start pointing over here, what I really want is this, you're onto something that nobody else has found. And that's where there is really true innovation, that you can really solve something that is a big problem for them right now, that is not being addressed by anybody else. And then you can start building that relationship and, get more solutions to them. So those are the pieces of advice that I would share.
Those are great. By the way, I think your first one was amazing. They were all great, but that first one was so key because the reason I say that is that, when things are chaotic, a little bit upside down in the world, wherever the case may be, some folks retrench, right? It's your natural instinct is to say, play defense, like Marcus said, and said, just hold on to the core, do what we're doing and make it more efficient, survive. And others say, no, we're just going to go in, we're jumping into the pool, we're going to go take a swing at this. And your mentality is more that. And you see, I don't know if it's 50-50 or what, but a lot of folks are retrenching as opposed to taking a swing. And I'm with you. I think they're missing a huge opportunity.
If you take a swing now, no one's going to remember it, right? Because there's a lot of other stuff going on. And so you can do a lot of crazy stuff, right? Crazy innovative stuff right now. And no one's going to know. Your customers aren't going to remember it, right? And they'll just be on to the other thing because we are in such a weird kind of situation. If you do it when things are more stable, it seems to be emblazoned in their brain. And they'll always go, I remember that new Coke thing, right? I remember new Coke. But, do you remember some of the other stuff that maybe Pepsi tried or Dr. Pepper or somebody else? No.
Right. So. Interesting. All right.
Yeah, timing matters. Thanks, Nancy.
Exactly.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nancy. It was great to have a conversation with you, and we wish you the best of luck with all the venture building that you're doing.
Hey, thanks. It was great meeting you guys, and can't wait to hear this then.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.